what's the starting point for the church in being able to address that?
Well, if this is a struggle of civilizations, in one sense it is. It is a clash of civilizations. Samuel Huntington, the Harvard professor, wrote the classic book in the 90s called The Clash of Civilizations. People kind of poo-pooed it. What he said is there will be a clash in the 20th century between Islam and the West. Then he said, Islam will win. Most people don't read the ending of that book. It's pretty chilling. And he says they'll win because they're more aggressive. Well, that's a challenge to the church. We've got to be more aggressive in evangelism and in fulfilling the cultural commission. We've got to present to the world a better way to organize our lives together, which is what a religious viewpoint does, than Islam. And I think we have a far better case. I've written about this in several of my books. We've got a far better case, but we've got to be prepared to make it and defend it. We've got to be much more committed to living the Christian life in the workplace, something you've done such superb work in the home, in every area of life, so that we permeate society with Christian values.
You know, I was in Morocco earlier this year, primarily an Islamic country, and one of the comments from the delightful professional people we were with was, "You're so different from the rest of Americans." And I said, "Well, what's the rest of America like?" And they said, "Well, you know, the people we see on television and in the movies." And it really struck me that we're exporting in the way of our culture, is helping shape their worldview of the West, but specifically of Christianity, because just as they're an Islamic country, they view us as a Christian country.
Precisely. And this is one of the things that just breaks my heart. When we have battles over gay marriage and that sort of thing in this country, we're feeding the fires of Islam and their hatred of us. And one of the things that, if you read Bernard Lewis, the Princeton scholar who's probably the leading authority on Islam in the world, basically he says that the radical Islamists are not opposed to Christianity as such. They are opposed to the fact that the West doesn't live up to its own Christian values. So they look at it as decadent hypocrites. And so the more we show signs of decadence in America, the more vulnerable we are to attack from Islam. And if we would suddenly see the light, we would start to say, we want to live more like a Christian country. We wouldn't have all these people wringing their hands saying, oh, these Christians are trying to impose their values on us. We would say, bring forth those Christian values, because we got to restore a sense of decency in order for the Islamic world, at 1,100,000,000 people, not to be wanting to destroy us. They want to destroy us because we're decadent. And that's what Osama bin Laden preaches, that makes us so terribly vulnerable. That's why the role of the church is so important. That's why biblical worldview is so important, that Christians start making a difference in our society.
So once again, the impact on our culture ties right back in with how the rest of the world views us.
Oh, absolutely. And when you start talking about the struggle with Islam and terrorism, this is a matter of life and death. I mean, this isn't just, are we doing good things in the community, or are we evangelizing prisoners, or are we taking care of the needs of the hungry? This is much deeper. This is going to the soul of our culture, the decay of which is making us incredibly vulnerable to Islamic terror.
Now, speaking of worldview at the level of public policy, I believe that it's our current administration's desire to foster democracies in the Middle East and in the rest of the world, and maybe Bernard Lewis has been a factor in driving that kind of thinking. In your view, is that a sound strategy, and do you feel that there are implications in following that strategy for the Great Commission, for the reach of the gospel?
Yeah, without any question I do. I think the strategy being adopted by the Bush administration is probably the most moralistic foreign policy this country has embraced since World War II. It is committed to the propagation of freedom, and you'll notice that George Bush many times says, freedom is a God-given right. He's echoing the words of Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. So we're saying that the answer to Islam is democracy. Because as long as Islam is a closed society, as long as they don't know what's going on in the West and other parts of the world, as long as it's repressive and women have no rights and people can't vote, there are always going to be hotbeds for resentment, anger, and terror. And so Bush's strategy is very simple. It comes directly from Bernard Lewis's writings and briefings he's done at the White House. And this 85-year-old Jew, brilliant man, is really giving extraordinary advice to this country right now if we listen to him. What he is saying is the only way you're going to defuse, defang radical Islamo-fascism is by democracy. Now, the big question is it possible? It's noble, it's a noble ideal, but can you do it? Well, one question is, do the American people have the will and the stomach to engage in what very likely could take us 10 years? We're so impatient. We watch today's television, we want instant answers, instant gratification. But this is a long haul. This is going to be a big battle. But it's working. People in Afghanistan, 9 million of them voted. People in Iraq voted. They dipped their finger in ink and held their finger up, which was the mark of Cain. They could be killed for that. Libya surrendered its nuclear stockpile. Iran is shaky because it's got democracies emerging on both sides. Egypt had allowed an election, even though they rigged the results. At least there's the seeds of democracy starting. Saudi Arabia has had local elections. I think democracy is the wave of the future because it is God's way of best assuring the freedom of individuals.